So I had to beg Ali to do this. I understand how he might feel a little self-conscious, and of course, you know, it's not every guy that gets to be played by a French movie star. I thought, first of all, we might talk a little bit about how this series came about, because both you and I had been approached over the years to do a project like this for other people. And then we had a telephone call, and we decided it's going to happen with or without us. Let's just take control of it. So that's how this series came about. We just formed a little conspiracy and went out to Hollywood, and I'm pretty happy with the way things came out. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your own experience of being involved in this.
Well, thank you very much. And before I answer your question, since I'm on the stage, I would like to thank each and every one of you for coming to this conference. We had people from more than 55 different nations. We had UN, EU, ICRC, different international organizations, amazing experts. And I would like to thank the State of Qatar and the leadership for allowing us to do this event and supporting us in doing this amazing getting together to discuss this important topic. So thank you very much for each and every one of you for being here. Thank you. It's, you know, when Larry called me about trying to do something, and as he correctly mentioned, people were calling me and him to do something about 9/11. I think, you know, many years had passed, about 16 years by the time we started doing the show. And I think it was time to tell the world and the American people what we know about that day. And the last episode, you see a lot of characters. Maybe it's not fair for you to understand what these characters are doing or saying if you don't watch the first 9 episodes. But what you see, basically, a couple of things. Number one, some elements in our own government knew about these guys being in the United States. Some other elements were trying to figure out Al-Qaeda, investigating different attacks that Al-Qaeda conducted, and the right hand was not telling the left hand what's happening. And the result was more than 3,000 Americans died, Americans and non-Americans, frankly. And an event that changed the world, 9/11 changed the world. And I thought with Larry about doing something, and we wanted to keep the narrative true. We wanted to basically give the world and the American people a program where it's not really a documentary, it's a drama. However, it is very true to the event that took place. So what you see, basically, is what it was. That's it. That's what happened. That's the bunch of events that led into 9/11. For me, it was very difficult. Larry can tell you I was annoying like heck when it comes to reading the script. And a lot of people advise me that between reality and drama, if you're talking Hollywood here, if you're talking the FBI, reality always wins. But in Hollywood, drama always wins. And I think I got used to it, but I think the facts in the show, the investigative facts, are spot on, accurate. And they go hand in hand with a lot of the investigations that happened after 9/11, to include the 9/11 Commission, to include the different Inspector General reports from the different agencies. So I hope you watch the show. I hope you're not going to enjoy it because it's depressing towards the end, but I think you will learn from it a lot, and hopefully we learn from the past so we won't repeat it again in the future.
Well, you know, as I was watching this again, and especially that, you know, extraordinary interrogation of Abu Jandal, here we are 17 years later, and it strikes me again and again so cruelly how the world could have taken a different turn. You know, one of the lessons that we failed to learn was, you know, the utility of just talking and listening to people, as you did with Abu Jandal, rather than torturing them. And you know, this is a turning point in American history that I really regret. And I wonder what you think about the lessons that we've learned from 9/11 until today, and what we might have learned.
I'm very pessimistic in my answer, frankly. I think since 9/11, strategically we didn't learn much. I think tactically we learned a lot. If you look at our intelligence agencies, intelligence sharing, the law enforcement capabilities, cooperation between different groups, both domestically and internationally, I think that's a lot better than it used to be before. But when it comes to understanding the narrative, understanding, for the lack of better term, the ideology, I think we are still where we were on September 10, 2011. If you look at the world today, and if you look at Al-Qaeda, let's take the narrative of Osama bin Laden. On the eve of 9/11, bin Laden had 400 members. 19 of them died on that day. Today, there are thousands and thousands of people who adhere to bin Laden's narrative and to bin Laden's ideology. Since the coalition, the Arab coalition war on Yemen, Al-Qaeda, you know, I think they had probably about 800 members before the war. Now they have between 4,000 to 5,000, and that's on the low estimates. If you look at Somalia, if you look at Al-Sahel with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb, and what they were able to accomplish in the region. If you look at Al-Jama'ah al-Islamiyah's comeback in Southeast Asia, if you look at what's happening in Syria or in Iraq, and let's not forget that ISIS, Daesh, is actually the branch of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So no, we don't, you know, at every junction of the so-called war on terrorism, we had a choice to make, and it seems to me that we made the wrong choice. The war in Iraq was a wrong choice. Torture was a wrong choice. A lot of tactics that we implemented during the war on terrorism, I truly, deeply in my heart, I believe they were wrong. We had a lot of successes tactically, but a lot of our tactical successes sums into a strategic failure. And that's why Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the narrative of Osama bin Laden today is way more popular in the Muslim world. And not only in the Muslim world, in the world, than it used to be on September 10, 2011.
So what would be correct choices for us to make now?
My God, I hope, you know, watching all the panels on this conference, hopefully we can get some good ideas. We had a lot of great people here. But I think we need to have a strategy. Strategy. I don't know, anybody can tell me what's our strategy in Afghanistan, or in Yemen, or in Syria, or in Iraq? And here I'm not talking about the United States, I'm talking even about the international community. We keep doing the same thing again and again and again, and we expect different results. I think one of our presidents, you know, defined that as the definition of insanity. So we need to do a strategy. We need to create an international coalition to deal with the narrative and with the incubating factors that feeds extremism. You know, Al-Qaeda, and when I say Al-Qaeda, the narrative of jihadi violence, if you want to call it, has been resilient over the years. Remember, Osama bin Laden used to be in Afghanistan fighting against the Soviets, and after the Battle of Jalalabad, he was really embarrassed, and he left, and he went to Saudi Arabia, and then he ended up going to Sudan. And when and everybody thought, okay, that's it. We're done with that guy, Osama bin Laden. And in Sudan, when he left in 2005, people said, oh, we're done with Al-Qaeda. You know, we're able to convince the Sudanese government to kick him out of the country. And he went to Afghanistan, and he built a new network. And he created an alliance with Mullah Omar and the Taliban. And Al-Qaeda changed from being a network at the time to being an organization with a very strong chain of commands. And he only worked with people who pledged allegiance to him. They did the East Africa Embassy bombing in August of 1998, the USS Cole in 2000, on October of 2000, and 9/11. Among a lot of other plots that we were lucky to disrupt, the Millennium Plot in Jordan, for example. But after 9/11, we swiftly responded. We destroyed Al-Qaeda as it existed at the time, but Al-Qaeda, again, adapted, and it became a network. It became a message. It became a narrative. Osama bin Laden's tapes and messages were what was keeping the organization together, and a lot of entities that joined Al-Qaeda after 9/11, pledged allegiance to Osama bin Laden after 9/11, were organizations that had nothing to do with him. Like AQIM, for example, they were remnants from the jihadi, from the Algerian civil war. So is Al-Shabaab movement, so is Al-Qaeda in Iraq that did not exist before our invasion to Iraq in 2003. So they have been adapting, but unfortunately we have been doing the same strategy, and we haven't been adapting our strategy. And today, they use sectarianism rather than their global narrative, and they take advantage of what happened after the Arab Spring, with all the chaos that took place across the Muslim world. And bin Laden gave instruction, actually, just before the bullets of the Navy SEALs took him down. He said, everything I told you about only fighting the United States, only trying to cut that evil tree that's called America, forget about it. He was watching what's happening in the Muslim world, and he realized that we are, and this is him, I'm trying to quote him, what's happening today in the Muslim world is something we did not see since the time of Salah ad-Din. And this is our opportunity to prevent anyone from filling that vacuum that exists. Because whoever going to fill that vacuum in places like Yemen or places like Libya, this is going to be the new agent for the Americans. Create chaos, manage chaos, make alliances with a lot of the different groups. Don't call yourself Al-Qaeda. Create allegiances with tribes and others, and be sure to keep that chaos going in order for us to establish our state and ultimately the caliphate. This strategy is not an Ayman Zawahiri strategy. This strategy is a bin Laden strategy, and they have been successfully implementing it since 2011, and we have been and we continue to fight a war as it used to be on September 11, 2001.
Well, that brings the question to bear then. Let's just talk about the United States. Is it better to withdraw from all these conflicts and let them rage without our involvement? Is that the better strategy than just remaining without a strategy?
It's not either or. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be done. What we do is we only have the military option on the table. You know, we talk a lot about diplomacy and international cooperations and negotiations, blah, 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 blah. But towards the end, the only thing that we have is the military. You know, Afghanistan, it has been the longest war. And Peter Bergen in the first day spoke really very logically about Afghanistan. But the only thing we continue to do is kick the can down the road and depend on the military. Just because we have the best military in the world, that does not mean that every problem in Afghanistan is a nail. Just because we have the biggest hammer, right? So where is our diplomatic engagements? in Afghanistan? Where is our initiatives for peace? We're trying to do something now, actually, with this administration, with the Trump administration. And I think, why not? Let's diplomacy is the art of talking to your enemies, not to your friends.
And then let's turn back our attention to the Muslim world, which is ripping itself apart with these civil wars and these national conflicts. Some of it prodded by, going back to Zarqawi and so on, a deliberate strategy to inflict chaos on the Muslim world. How does the Muslim world cope with this in a way of bringing some kind of stability back into this region?
A lot of things that's happening in the Muslim world have to do with the Muslim world, but to the most part also with the international community. Look, there is a struggle that's going on not only between Russia and the United States, but also regionally between Saudi Arabia and between Iran and between a lot of the different regional powers. And when you look at what's happening, international communities and international powers, and regional powers has a lot to do with the chaos of in the Muslim world. Had a lot to do with the chaos that we've seen in Iraq yesterday in the wonderful, powerful, depressing movie about ISIS tomorrow, and what we continue to see in so many different places. So we can just point the finger at the West, as the United States, but you know what? What's happening in Yemen, for example, has a lot to do with also regional powers fighting with each other. What's happening in Syria is international and regional power. The international community hold the responsibility to lead on this. And we cannot lead from behind to establish peace in any of these places. We have to lead on the front. With power comes responsibility.
Well, speaking of leadership, I'm struck by the fact that Al-Qaeda and its progeny are in many respects leaderless. Leaders are killed or disappear, and yet this movement continues to increase and become more profligate in its numbers, and so it strikes me that that it's very difficult to deal, or to the diplomacy that you speak of is very difficult to find any agent to encounter. It's some kind of widespread movement without real leadership.
Well, I think the narrative is very powerful, and unfortunately, a lot of times the way we are responding to the narrative is by acting in a way that reinforces that narrative. For example, ISIS claims that the whole world is coming against Islam. What do? We put coalition of 65 different countries, most of them are not actually doing anything, to fight ISIS, and we kind of verify to their people that there is a war against Islam, and even though this is so far away from the truth. They say, American soldiers and American, officers torture people, and what we do, we start a program to do exactly that. They talk about the end of, Akhir al-Zaman, the end of the world battles, and the Armageddon, and Dabiq, I remember when we were in Afghanistan after 9/11, I was one of the first people there. We're catching people on the field, and one guy asked me, one close associate to Osama bin Laden, he said, "When are we going to invade Iraq?" And I was really shocked, like, well, what are you talking about, invade Iraq? And he's like, "Oh, you will invade Iraq. This is in the Hadith. This is a battle, for the black rivers under the land of Iraq. And you're going to invade it because that's exactly what we're fighting for. This is black banners coming from Khorasan." Guess what we did? 2 years later, we really invaded Iraq. So, a lot of times we fed that narrative instead of countering that narrative. And I think we need to understand the enemy in order to defeat the enemy. Sun Tzu said many centuries across the millennia, If you know your enemy and know yourself, you will win 100 times in 100 battles. Unfortunately, we didn't take the time to know the enemy, and in the process, we forget who we are, and that's why we are here today.
Well, I want to thank you, Ali, for all you've done, not just today and yesterday, but historically. You've been an amazing figure in this long, epic battle that we're in, and thank God that you're a part of it. And I also am so appreciative to have you as a friend. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Larry.